You know that idea of all or nothing? That razor's edge where a bunch of different parts either clicks together to become a perfect whole, or, well, it's just a useless pile of stuff? We're about to dive into some really fascinating ancient legal texts that have this profound way of thinking about what it truly means for things to be unified. I mean, it's a question we bump into all the time, right? Whether you're working on a project or making a plan or building anything really, is almost there the same thing as actually being there? Is close enough ever really good enough? That's the core puzzle we're going to unpack. Okay, think about it like this. You're baking a cake. You've got your flour, the sugar, the butter. Everything's there, but you're missing the eggs. Now, you don't have almost a cake, do you? You've just got a bowl of ingredients. The eggs are absolutely essential. Without them, the whole thing just doesn't work. The parts are completely dependent on each other. All right, so let's take that exact same logic and travel back a couple of thousand years to our main case study. During the festival of Sukkot, there's a ritual that requires what are called the 4 species, a palm branch, a citron, and some branches of myrtle and willow. So here's the ancient puzzle. What happens if you can only find 3 of them? Do you get partial credit, or what? So here's our game plan. We're going to start with that all or nothing question. Then we'll see just how common this idea is. After that, we'll decode the ancient logic behind it, check out a really cool debate it sparked, and finally, uncover the powerful meaning behind it all.
All right, first step, all or nothing. Let's really dig into this puzzle of the 4 species.
So a foundational text of Jewish law, the Mishnah, is super clear on this. It basically says, look, with the 4 species, if you're missing even one, you haven't done the commandment. Period. It's a package deal. 3 out of 4 equals 0. But the real question is, why? And that question leads us perfectly into our next section, the interdependence list. Because as it turns out, this all-or-nothing principle is way bigger than just a few branches and a piece of fruit. The Mishnah actually shows us the sheer scope of this rule. It lays out this whole list of other rituals where the exact same logic applies. You've got the 2 goats for the Day of Atonement, gotta have both. The 7 sprinklings of blood for a purification rite, yep, you need all 7 or none of them count. This isn't just some random one-off rule, it's a fundamental legal concept. So this brings up a huge question, right? The original biblical texts don't just come out and say, hey, by the way, all these things are all or nothing deals. So how did the ancient rabbis figure this out with such confidence? Where's the source code for this way of thinking?
Let's go find it. For Section 3, we're going to be reading between the lines to uncover that exact source code.
And to do that, we need to quickly talk about the Gemara. So if the Mishnah is the text that states the rule, the Gemara is the incredibly deep analytical commentary that always asks, why? And how do we know? You can think of it as the detailed record of the rabbi's detective work. So the Gemara reveals that the rabbis were paying ridiculously close attention to specific keywords in the text. For example, when the Bible describes a ritual and calls it a statute, or chukah in Hebrew, they saw that as a signal. It was like a little flag that meant every single detail of that ritual was an absolutely indispensable requirement.
And it wasn't just one magic word. They found other keywords that acted as these kinds of signals. When the text uses what they called a term of being, like the phrase, they shall be, that was another clue. It meant that all the different pieces mentioned have to exist together as one single, indivisible unit. It's an amazingly subtle and consistent way of reading the text.
So what about our lulav? This is where their method is just so cool. The biblical verse says, and you shall take. Well, the rabbis zoomed in on that one Hebrew word for take, and they argue that it implies what they called a complete taking. You can't have a complete taking if part of it is missing, right? The instruction for unity was right there, baked into that single verb. Which, of course, brings us to the next section. Because as soon as you establish that you need all 4 species, another question pops up immediately. Welcome to the great lulav debate. Turns out, it's not just about what you have, but how you hold it.
So you've done the work, you've gathered all 4 species. Now what? Do you actually have to physically bind them all together into one bundle to do the commandment? Or is just kind of holding them all at the same time good enough?
And this kicked off a major debate. On one side, you have Rabbi Yehuda, who argued that, yes, binding is absolutely required. And his logic was pretty clever. He pointed out that the word take Used for the lulav is the same word used way back in the story of the Paschal offering in Egypt, which specifically involved a bundle of hyssop. So he reasoned, if that taking required a bundle, this one must too. But most of the other rabbis disagreed. They said, nope, binding is not essential for the ritual to count. So the final ruling is fascinating. It says, there is a mitzvah to bind it, but if one did not bind it, it is fit. Now, hang on a second. That sounds like a total contradiction. How can something be a mitzvah, a commandment, but you don't actually have to do it for it to be valid? The resolution is just so elegant. The rabbis explain that binding the species together isn't about legal validity, it's about beautifying the act. It's about showing honor. They actually pull from a biblical verse that says, "This is my God and I will beautify him." So you fulfill the bare minimum just by having all 4 species. But you elevate the act, you beautify it, when you bind them into a clear, beautiful symbol of unity.
And that idea of a symbol is the perfect way to get into our final section, a bundle of meaning. This is where we go from a technical legal rule to a really powerful metaphor that applies to all of us.
The rabbis taught that these 4 species aren't just plants. They're symbols for 4 different kinds of people you find in any community. The etrog, which has both a taste and a smell, represents people with both wisdom and good deeds. The palm has taste but no smell, so that's wisdom without deeds. The myrtle has a smell but no taste, good deeds without wisdom. And the poor willow has neither. And this leads to this absolutely profound conclusion. The rabbis taught that just like the ritual itself is incomplete without all 4 species, the community isn't whole either. Its purpose isn't fully accomplished until every single type of person, the wise, the simple, the do-gooders, and the ones who are still figuring it out, are all bound together in one single bundle. So here's the crucial point, the big takeaway. What started as a really technical legal question about plants becomes this deep statement about humanity. The whole is so much more than the sum of its parts. And whether we're talking about a cake, a ritual, or a community, true fulfillment, true completion, only happens when all the essential elements are there and bound together as one. And that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. Just look around in your own life, in your work teams, your families, your communities. Where do you see it? Where do individual parts, only when they're truly brought together and unified, create something brand new, something transcendent?